How dare you talk to me like that? Vivian snapped, stepping forward with a smug smile. You're nothing but my husband's ex. Know your place. Alara looked at her calmly, her silence cutting deeper than any insult. But when Vivian pushed again, laughing, no wonder he left you. You look poor even in peace. A sharp sound echoed through the room. Slap. Gasps filled the air. Alara's hand still hovered midair, her voice steady but cold. Respect, she said, is something money can't buy. Damon, her ex-husband, stormed forward in fury, his hand raised to strike her back. But before he could, another hand caught his wrist midair. A deep, composed voice followed. Don't you dare lay a hand on my wife. The room went silent. And what follows next will shock you. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories that prove karma never misses. Now, let's dive into The Billionaire's Wife. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Raven Hotel gleamed above the crowd, scattering light like diamonds over silk gowns and sharp tuxedos. The annual Hearts of Hope Charity Gala was one of the city's most anticipated events, a parade of power disguised as generosity. Alara Whitmore adjusted the silver clasp of her clutch and smiled politely as another donor praised her art foundation. She had learned to play the social game. Speak kindly, listen more, and never reveal too much. But the moment she turned toward the entrance, her smile faltered. Damon Cross had just walked in. Her ex-husband looked almost exactly as she remembered. Handsome, confident, and insufferably proud. His hand rested possessively at the waist of a tall brunette in a glittering gold dress. Vivian Cross. For a heartbeat, Alara considered walking away. But pride held her still. She wouldn't hide. Not anymore. Across the room, Damon noticed her. The smirk that spread across his face made her stomach tighten. He whispered something to Vivian, who laughed too loudly, her eyes already locked on Alara like a predator spotting its prey. They made their way across the hall. Alara, Damon greeted smoothly, his tone dripping with false charm. It's been what, 2 years? 3. She replied coolly, meeting his gaze. Time flies when you stop counting losses. Vivian giggled, clinging tighter to Damon's arm. We were just talking about you. I told him it must be strange seeing someone actually keep him happy. Alara's smile didn't waver. Happiness looks different on everyone, I suppose. Vivian's expression tightened, but she quickly recovered. So what are you doing these days? Still trying to paint, was it? Before Alara could answer, the host called for everyone's attention, announcing the next round of donations. The crowd shifted, and the trio's tense triangle momentarily broke apart. But as Alara turned away, she could still feel Damon's gaze on her back. Curious, mocking, and faintly unsettled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small under it. She felt ready. Because tonight, fate had decided to reunite them, but not on his terms. The evening carried on with music and laughter, but beneath the glitter, invisible battles brewed. The gala's scent of champagne and roses couldn't hide the bitterness that lingered between old lovers. Alara moved to the edge of the ballroom, speaking politely with donors, her posture relaxed, graceful, unbothered. Yet she could feel Damon's eyes drifting toward her every few minutes, like a ghost of a past he couldn't quite bury. Vivian noticed too. She leaned toward Damon, whispering with a smirk, "Your ex-wife still thinks she belongs here. It's adorable." Damon chuckled quietly. Let her. She's always been good at pretending. Moments later, as fate would have it, they crossed paths again, near the dessert table, surrounded by polite chatter and forced smiles. "Oh, Alara," Vivian cooed, holding her glass of wine. "I didn't get to ask earlier. What brings you here tonight? Volunteering, perhaps?" Alara smiled, calm and unbothered. "Actually, the art foundation I direct is sponsoring tonight's auction." Vivian blinked. "You're sponsoring?" Damon's brow furrowed, just slightly. A flicker of surprise he tried to hide behind another smirk. "Yes," Alara continued smoothly. "We've raised over $2 million this year for orphan education. It's been rewarding." Vivian forced a laugh. "How inspiring. Though, I must say, it's easier to give when you have nothing to lose, right?" Her words cut sharp, but Alara's eyes didn't flinch. "I wouldn't know," she replied softly. "I've already lost what wasn't meant for me." Damon's smile froze. Vivian glanced at him, puzzled by the subtle shift in his expression. "Well," Alara said, setting down her glass, It was nice seeing you both. Enjoy your evening. She turned to leave, her poise effortless, her dignity untouchable. But behind her, Vivian muttered just loud enough. No wonder he left. Too proud to beg, too plain to keep. Alara stopped. For a moment, she considered letting it go. But something in her, not anger, but justice, flickered awake. She turned slightly, her gaze cold and composed. Be careful, Vivian, she said. Mocking others often invites mirrors you're not ready to look into. Then she walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation marks to her strength. Damon watched her go, that old, dangerous thought creeping into his mind. What if he had let go of the wrong woman? The orchestra played softly in the background as the auction resumed. Laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind of laughter born of wealth and wine. Alara stood by one of the side tables, trying to slip away unnoticed when she heard it again. Vivian's voice, sharp and taunting. Well, if it isn't the charity queen, Vivian sneered, stepping closer with her wineglass half tilted. Still playing saint to hide the fact you couldn't keep a husband? The small circle around them went silent. Conversations faltered. Even the music seemed to hush. Alara turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Be careful, Vivian, she said softly. Your words say more about you than they ever could about me. Vivian laughed coldly. Oh please, you're nothing but Damon's leftover. Everyone knows it. Look at you. You dress simple now, live simple. You traded diamonds for dignity, and even that looks cheap. Gasps fluttered around the room. Damon smirked, clearly enjoying the scene. But before Vivian could turn away, slap. The sound echoed across the ballroom like a whip. Every eye turned. Every breath froze. Alara's hand was still raised, her face calm, her voice steady as glass. I tolerated your insult once, she said quietly. But you will never speak to me like that again. Vivian staggered back, clutching her cheek in shock. You hit me. Damon stepped forward, anger flashing across his face. How dare you touch my wife? He raised his hand. But before it could fall, another hand caught his wrist mid-air, firm and unyielding. A deep, controlled voice cut through the stunned silence. Don't you dare lay a hand on my wife. All heads turned. Standing behind Alara, tall and composed in a tailored black suit, was Gareth Sterling. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet warning. Gareth, Alara whispered, relief washing through her. He didn't take his eyes off Damon. Touch her again, and you'll learn what real consequences feel like. The entire hall stood still. Damon's hand trembled under Gareth's grip before the billionaire released it, cold and controlled. Alara stepped back beside her husband, her voice steady. Let's go. And as they walked out of the ballroom together, the whispers began, not about scandal, but about the woman who rose above it. The entire ballroom froze. The air thickened, whispers dying mid-sentence. Damon's raised hand hung in the air, but it was no longer his own. Gareth's strong grip held it suspended, unmoving. For a moment, no one breathed. The tall, sharply dressed man beside Alara didn't need to speak to command the room. His presence alone was enough. His calm eyes, dark and steady, seemed to strip Damon of every ounce of arrogance he had left. Gareth finally let go. Damon staggered a step back, his voice faltering. Who are you to interfere? Alara's heart pounded, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. Gareth turned slightly, his voice deep and even. I'm the man you tried to strike. The man whose wife you just insulted. A murmur swept through the crowd. Wife? Did he say wife? Vivian blinked in disbelief. You're married to him? She stammered, pointing at Alara like she was seeing a ghost. Alara looked her straight in the eye. Yes, she said calmly. For almost a year now. Someone whispered from the crowd. That's Gareth Sterling, the owner of Sterling Global Holdings. Gasps rippled through the room. The same man whose name filled headlines, the billionaire known for his quiet philanthropy and ruthless intelligence, was her husband. Damon's expression cracked. His voice was suddenly smaller. You're your Sterling? Gareth's gaze never wavered. Yes, and you are the man who made the mistake of underestimating my wife. The room erupted in hushed awe. Damon stood frozen, face flushed with humiliation. Vivian's mouth trembled as she tried to form words that wouldn't come. Alara turned slightly to Gareth, her tone soft but confident. Let's go. We don't need to waste another second here. Gareth nodded. As they walked away, The crowd instinctively parted to make space, not out of fear, but respect. Behind them, Damon and Vivian stood among whispers and stares, their pride collapsing like a broken glass chandelier. And for the first time, Alara didn't feel like the woman left behind. She felt like the woman who finally walked ahead. The ballroom buzzed with murmurs long after Gareth and Alara turned to leave. Guests who once admired Damon now whispered behind their champagne glasses, their eyes darting between him and the exit. Did you hear? That's Gareth Sterling, Sterling Global Holdings. They say he owns half the city. And that's his wife? The one Damon humiliated years ago? The gossip spread like wildfire, every whisper chipping away at Damon's pride. Vivian clutched Damon's arm, her face pale. Damon, she hissed under her breath. Everyone's staring. We need to say something. Fix this. Fix this, he snapped quietly. How am I supposed to fix that? I didn't know she'd. He stopped when he saw Gareth pause near the exit, turning slightly to speak with the event host. Even from across the room, Gareth's composure exuded quiet dominance. The host, a man who rarely bowed to anyone, nodded respectfully. Within seconds, Gareth's company banner replaced another sponsor's name on the projection screen. Sterling Global was now the event's lead donor. That single move rewrote the room's hierarchy. Every eye shifted from Damon to Gareth. Vivian forced a nervous laugh. I suppose she married well, huh? Damon didn't answer. His throat felt tight. Alara, standing beside Gareth, glanced back only once. Her gaze wasn't triumphant. It was peaceful, as if she had finally closed a door that once chained her. The event organizer hurried over to them, smiling nervously. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, thank you so much for your generous donation. You've truly honored this event. Gareth nodded politely. We support causes that value respect, he said, his eyes cutting briefly toward Damon. And integrity. That word landed like a stone. Damon lowered his gaze. As the Sterlings made their exit, a round of applause followed, not for wealth, but for dignity reclaimed. Outside, Alara exhaled softly, the night air cool against her skin. You didn't have to do that, she said. Gareth looked at her, a small smile forming. No, he replied. But I wanted them to remember the kind of woman they threw away. Behind them, inside the ballroom, Damon's world crumbled in silence. The man who once believed he owned everything had just learned the difference between power and worth. Outside the Grand Raven Hotel, the night glowed with city lights and the soft hum of engines waiting at the valet. Gareth's black Bentley idled quietly by the curb, its reflection shimmering in the marble glass of the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The same people who once flattered Damon now kept their distance. Conversations died when he passed. Even Vivian's once confident smile had dissolved into silence. Gareth and Alara walked side by side through the double doors, not saying a word. But their silence carried a power that no argument could match. Reporters outside turned their cameras instantly. Flashlights burst, and the questions flew. Mr. Sterling, was that your wife who stood up to Damon Cross? Alara, how does it feel to make such a powerful statement tonight? Alara smiled faintly, but didn't stop. Gareth placed a gentle hand at her back, guiding her toward the car. His only words were calm and measured. No comments tonight. They slid into the car as the door closed softly behind them. The sound of the crowd faded, replaced by the quiet luxury inside. For a while, neither spoke. Alara finally broke the silence. I didn't mean to cause a scene, she murmured, her eyes on the city through the tinted glass. Gareth looked at her, his tone warm but firm. You didn't cause a scene, he said. You claimed your dignity. There's a difference. Alara exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. Do you think they'll ever stop talking about it? They'll talk for a week, Gareth replied with a small smile. But you? You'll walk away with peace that lasts a lifetime. She turned to him, her eyes softening. You really think I handled it well? Gareth reached over and held her hand gently. You handled it with grace. That's something money can't buy, and power can't fake. As their car pulled away, the hotel's grand lights faded behind them. Inside, Damon stood alone near the exit, watching them leave. The applause that once followed him now belonged to someone else. And for the first time, he understood. He hadn't just lost Alara. He had lost the only woman who ever made him better. The sound of rain hitting the apartment window was the only rhythm breaking the silence that night. The city outside moved on as if nothing had changed, But inside the Cross penthouse, everything had shattered. Alara stood near the window, still wearing the gold necklace Damon gave her on their second anniversary. Her reflection looked foreign now, a woman holding herself together by sheer strength. "Damon, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me it's not true." Damon stood across the room, his tie loosened, his eyes cold and distant. "Alara, don't make this harder than it needs to be." "So it is true," she said softly. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Vivian means nothing serious." Alara's voice broke through, sharp this time. "You're cheating on me, and that's your defense?" His tone hardened. "You've changed, Alara. You care more about your art and your charity than you do about us. I need someone who stands by me, not behind her easel painting her emotions." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You mean someone who obeys you without question?" Damon's silence was confirmation enough. Alara picked up the divorce papers lying on the glass table. Her hand trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "If you're that unhappy, you don't have to pretend anymore." He shrugged, emotionless. Maybe this is for the best. For a moment, she just stared at him, the man she had once believed she'd grow old with. The man who now looked like a stranger wearing her husband's face. She signed the papers with a steady hand, the pen scratching louder than thunder outside. "Goodbye, Damon," she said quietly, setting the pen down. "I hope one day you realize what you just lost." He didn't answer. He didn't even look up. As Alara walked out into the rain, her dress clinging to her skin, she felt pain, but also a strange sense of freedom. The chapter of being Mrs. Damon Cross was over. She just didn't know yet that the universe was preparing her for something. Someone far greater. 2 months after the divorce, Alara found herself standing at a charity auction. The same kind of event she once attended proudly as Damon Cross's wife. Only this time, she was there alone. The whispers followed her the moment she entered. People she once dined with now avoided her gaze, leaning close to one another, murmuring behind elegant smiles. "Did you hear? Damon's already engaged to that model, Vivian. She's younger, of course. Poor Alara. I suppose some women just aren't built to keep a man like him." Every sentence landed like a knife, but she walked on, head high, her posture refusing to bend even when her heart wanted to break. Halfway through the evening, her world collapsed again. The event's host announced the evening's special guest, Damon Cross, accompanied by his fiancée, Vivian Lang. Alara froze. All eyes turned toward the grand staircase where Damon descended in a tailored black suit, his arm draped around Vivian, who sparkled in a white silk gown, the kind Alara once wore for him. And then, like fate's cruel joke, the host added, "Tonight, they're making a generous donation to celebrate their engagement." The applause was thunderous. Alara couldn't move. The woman who had once helped Damon build his fortune now stood invisible, erased, replaced in public as if her years beside him had never mattered. Vivian caught her eye from across the room and smiled. That same mocking curve of lips that would one day return to haunt her. Damon raised his glass in Alara's direction. "To new beginnings," he said loudly, "and to lessons learned." The crowd laughed politely, not realizing they were laughing at her. Alara turned and walked out before the tears could win. She reached the parking lot, leaning against her car, her breath shallow. For a long time, she stared up at the night sky, its stars blurred by tears. "You took everything from me," she whispered, voice trembling. "But I'll rebuild, and when I do, I'll never need your name again." That night, Alara drove away from her old life with nothing left but resolve. And from that resolve, her rise quietly began. The first few months after the divorce were brutal. Alara had walked out of Damon's life with nothing but a few suitcases and her pride, and even that felt heavy some days. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city, far from the high-rise world she once belonged to. The nights were quiet, the walls bare, and the silence often unbearable. But for the first time in years, that silence belonged entirely to her. Every morning, she forced herself up before dawn. She painted again, not for profit, not for praise, but for healing. Her small kitchen table turned into an art corner, her walls filled with colors that matched her emotions. Anger, grief, hope, and eventually, calm. It was during one of those early mornings that she met Maya Trent, a gallery owner who happened to stop by a local art cafe where Alara's sketches hung for display. Maya saw something raw and real in her work, emotion that couldn't be faked. "Who's the artist?" Maya had asked. When Alara hesitated to answer, Maya smiled gently. "You are, aren't you?" That encounter became the start of a quiet rebirth. Within months, Maya featured Alara's paintings in a small gallery exhibition. To Alara's surprise, every piece sold out within a week. It wasn't fame she felt, it was validation. Proof that she could create beauty from pain. Slowly, life found rhythm again. Her foundation grew from a simple charity project into a full-fledged organization supporting underprivileged young artists. She began traveling, mentoring, teaching. The name Alara Whitmore started appearing in art magazines, not as Damon's ex-wife, but as a woman who rose on her own terms. One evening, after a successful exhibition, Maya raised a glass and said, "You're stronger than you think, Alara. You didn't just survive, you transformed." Alara smiled softly. "I guess the fall was necessary," she said, "because that's where I found my wings." And though she didn't know it yet, fate was already weaving her path towards someone who would see her worth long before her name, a man named Gareth Sterling. The cafe was quiet that afternoon, soft jazz playing, the smell of fresh coffee floating through the air. Alara sat by the window sketching, lost in the gentle rhythm of pencil against paper. It had become her ritual, one peaceful hour each day away from deadlines and donors. That's when she heard a voice beside her. "Mind if I sit here? Every other table seems occupied, or intimidated by you." She looked up, slightly amused. The man standing there had a kind smile and sharp eyes, confidence without arrogance. "Please," she said, gesturing to the empty seat. He sat down, placing his cup neatly on the table. "I'm Gareth Sterling." The name didn't immediately strike her. He wore no flash, no designer arrogance, just quiet composure. "Alara," she replied, offering a small smile. "Whitmore." "Ah," he said thoughtfully. "The artist whose work filled Maya's gallery last month." Her eyebrows lifted. "You know Maya?" "Old friend," he said easily. "She made sure I saw your exhibit. Told me your art had truth in it." Alara laughed lightly. "Truth is messy. Not everyone likes it." Gareth's smile deepened. "Then you and I will get along perfectly." That first meeting lasted longer than either intended. They talked about art, travel, silence, loss, and hope. Not as two people performing small talk, but as souls that recognized something familiar in each other. Days turned into weeks. Gareth started visiting the foundation, offering silent support without overstepping. He didn't try to fix her. He simply stood beside her while she rebuilt. One evening, after a gallery opening, Gareth said quietly, "You know, I once thought strength meant control. Then I met you, and realized it means peace." Alara looked at him, truly looked. His words didn't promise rescue. They offered partnership. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't in years, safety. It wasn't the fireworks of her past love. It was steady, real, and healing. She smiled faintly. "You have a way of making chaos sound like calm." He chuckled softly. "Maybe that's why I'm here. To remind you peace isn't weakness." And from that day on, Gareth Sterling wasn't just a name in the crowd. He became her calm after the storm. A year later, Alara's life looked nothing like the one she once begged to keep. Her mornings started with sunlight spilling across the penthouse balcony, the quiet hum of the city below, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and Gareth reading the paper beside her. Their days weren't loud. They were steady, filled with laughter that didn't need to prove anything. Her art foundation had grown beyond her dreams. With Gareth's subtle guidance, never control, only support, she had expanded it internationally, opening programs for young artists in 3 countries. What once started as an act of survival had become a legacy, but what she loved most wasn't the success. It was the freedom to breathe. One afternoon, she hosted a charity exhibit featuring pieces from her students. She stood at the center of the gallery, surrounded by colors that told stories of hope. Maya stood beside her, grinning. "You've changed," Maya said, sipping champagne. "You used to second-guess every brushstroke. Now you just live." Alara smiled. "I guess I stopped painting for approval and started painting for peace." Across the room, Gareth watched her, not with possession, but admiration. When their eyes met, his expression said everything words couldn't. Later that night, as they walked home beneath the soft glow of city lights, Alara said quietly, "You know, I never thought I'd trust again. I thought love was supposed to hurt before it felt real. Gareth stopped walking, turning to her. Love isn't supposed to hurt, he said simply. It's supposed to heal. She looked up at him, a smile touching her lips. You make it sound easy. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. It's not. But when two people choose peace over pride, it works. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. The kind that meant understanding, respect, and the quiet joy of being seen. For the first time in years, Alara no longer feared the future. She had learned that healing wasn't found in forgetting the past, but in rewriting what came after. The marble floors of Cross Industries echoed with the sound of impatience. Damon's polished shoes striking faster than usual. He was restless, distracted, snapping at his assistant over every minor detail. The company's quarterly reports were strong, yet his temper burned hotter than ever. It wasn't business that unsettled him. It was a name. Alara Whitmore. It had started as gossip. A headline on an art blog Vivian had carelessly shown him one morning over breakfast. Look, she had said, waving her phone. Your ex-wife's playing philanthropist now. Some billionaire backing her foundation. Cute, isn't it? Damon barely looked up then. Good for her, he muttered. But over the next few weeks, that name kept surfacing, whispered in investor circles, mentioned at board meetings, praised at charity events. Each time, the tone carried admiration. She's done well for herself. Her new husband, Gareth Sterling, is something else. They're the power couple of the year. At first, Damon brushed it off. Then curiosity crept in. Then regret. He started reading the articles, watching her interviews. In one photo, Alara stood beside Gareth at a youth art gala, her smile radiant and her eyes calm. The same eyes he once ignored. Vivian noticed the way his expression changed. You're not still thinking about her, are you? She teased, though her voice trembled slightly. Damon didn't answer. He just stared at the picture longer than he should have. Later that week, he met a client who had recently collaborated with the Sterling Foundation. You know, the client said casually, Mrs. Sterling is remarkable. She has the kind of grace that commands respect without saying a word. Her husband's lucky. Those words hit like a stone. That night, Damon poured himself a drink and stared out the window of his penthouse, the same view Alara once loved. For the first time, it didn't look like success. It looked empty. He whispered her name softly, as if confessing to the air. Alara. But across the city, she was asleep beside a man who had never once made her feel small. And Damon Cross, the man who once had everything, was beginning to realize he had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. The ballroom of the Imperial Crown Hotel glimmered with golden chandeliers and laughter that smelled of money and power. Damon adjusted his cufflinks, his usual air of confidence returning as photographers flashed their cameras. Vivian, dazzling in crimson silk, leaned toward him and whispered, "This is our crowd, Damon. Let's make an impression." He smirked, his ego momentarily soothed. When have I ever failed to? The couple mingled easily at first, greeting business partners and socialites. Everything felt routine until the event host tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man announced cheerfully, "tonight, we celebrate the launch of the Art for Tomorrow initiative, a collaboration between Sterling Global and the Whitmore Foundation." Damon froze. His hand, halfway to his glass, stilled midair. Vivian glanced at him, oblivious. Sterling Global? Isn't that? Before she could finish, the room burst into applause. The crowd turned toward the staircase as the evening's guests of honor descended, Gareth and Alara Sterling. Alara glowed in a navy gown that moved like water. Her confidence wasn't loud. It was effortless, the kind born from peace, not pride. Gareth walked beside her, composed and attentive, his hand resting lightly at her back. Damon's heart dropped. The same ballroom that once echoed his arrogance now whispered her name instead. A businessman nearby leaned toward Damon, unaware of their history. "That's Alara Sterling," he said. "Her foundation's transforming young artists' lives. Beautiful, isn't she? You can feel her presence the moment she walks in." Damon couldn't respond. His chest tightened. Alara's eyes swept the room, calm, poised, and landed briefly on him. No hatred, no bitterness, just quiet acknowledgement, like looking at an old chapter that no longer hurt. Vivian shifted uneasily beside him. "You never said that's who she married." "I didn't know," Damon murmured. His voice cracked slightly. As the applause continued, Damon realized what true power looked like. Not the kind that buys respect, but the kind that earns it. Alara wasn't the woman he left behind. She was the woman who had outgrown him completely. And in that moment, surrounded by light, the mighty Damon Cross finally understood what it felt like to be invisible. The gala was in full swing, but Damon's world had fallen eerily silent. The music, the laughter, the sparkle of champagne glasses, it all blurred into background noise. His focus was locked on Alara and Gareth, standing together as the perfect image of composure and power. Vivian had long drifted away to gossip with friends, leaving Damon standing near the balcony, drink untouched. His thoughts were a storm of regret and jealousy. Then, as if fate wasn't done teaching him humility, Gareth approached. "Mr. Cross." The deep, composed voice made Damon's shoulders tense. He turned, forcing a faint smirk. "Mr. Sterling, congratulations on your impressive partnership." Garrett's expression remained unreadable. "Thank you. Though I believe our connection goes beyond business, doesn't it?" The weight behind his words made Damon's jaw tighten. "You've certainly heard stories," Damon said lightly, trying to regain control. "But you should know, whatever was between Alara and me is ancient history." Gareth stepped closer, his tone still calm, but sharper now. "And yet you still stare at her like you own something you lost. Let me make something clear, you don't." Damon swallowed, his smirk fading. "I don't mean her any harm." "I'm not worried about that," Gareth replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm only concerned that you understand the difference between regret and right." He paused, letting the silence press. "You had your chance. You broke her, and she rebuilt herself without you. I won't let you take even a moment of her peace again." For the first time, Damon looked away. His reflection in the glass doors showed a man he barely recognized, one stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. Finally, Gareth spoke again, quieter this time. "You don't have to like me, Mr. Cross, but you will respect her." Then he turned to leave, calm as ever. Damon stood motionless, his pride bleeding in silence. He wanted to hate Gareth, but deep down, he envied him, not for his wealth, but for the way Alara looked at him, with trust, something she never gave Damon again. And that truth stung more than any warning ever could. Vivian's laughter rang hollow as she stood with a group of women near the buffet table, pretending to enjoy their shallow chatter. The conversation swirled around gossip, jewelry, and influence, the things she once believed defined her worth. But her eyes kept wandering across the ballroom to the couple at the center of everyone's admiration, Alara and Gareth Sterling. The way Gareth stood beside his wife spoke volumes without a word. His hand rested lightly on the small of Alara's back, a silent symbol of respect and protection. And Alara, she didn't cling or compete for attention. She simply was. Graceful, calm, whole. Vivian tried to smile as one of the women whispered, "That's the Sterlings. They're incredible together, aren't they?" "Yes," Vivian replied softly, her throat tight. "They are." She turned away quickly, pretending to sip her drink, but her reflection in the mirror behind the bar betrayed her, the shimmer of tears threatening to escape. When Damon returned to her side, she tried to mask it. "Let's go, Damon. This party's getting dull." He didn't answer immediately. His eyes were still locked on Alara. That same look Vivian had noticed earlier, the one that terrified her. "Damon?" she repeated, her voice sharper this time. He blinked and looked at her blankly. "What?" "Oh, sure, let's go." That small hesitation was enough to break something inside her. The confidence she had once wielded like a weapon suddenly crumbled. In the car, neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Finally, Vivian whispered, "Do you still love her?" Damon's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter." "That's not an answer," she said, her voice cracking. He looked out the window. "No, it's a truth." Vivian turned away, blinking back tears. She had fought so hard to take Alara's place, only to realize she'd stolen a title, not a heart. Meanwhile, across the city, Alara rested her head on Gareth's shoulder, unaware of the quiet storm she'd left behind. Vivian's envy wasn't just of Alara's husband or wealth. It was of her peace, her grace, and her strength to walk away from what Vivian was still trapped in. And that realization hurt the most. The morning sun spilled gently through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the penthouse in soft gold. The city below stirred awake, but up here, everything was still, serene, untouched by noise or rush. Alara stirred beneath the linen sheets, her eyes fluttering open to find Gareth already awake beside her, reading quietly. He turned when she moved, smiling that calm, familiar smile that always made her feel grounded. "Good morning," he said softly. "Morning," she murmured, stretching slightly. "You've been up early again." He chuckled. "Old habits. I like watching the sunrise. It reminds me to start the day grateful." Alara smiled, her gaze drifting toward the view. The skyline shimmered with promise. A city she once feared now felt like home. For a moment, she let herself remember the storm that had once consumed her life. Damon's betrayal, the humiliation, the loss, all of it felt like a distant story belonging to someone else. She had walked through fire and emerged unburned. Gareth reached over, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're thinking again," he said gently. She laughed quietly. "I was just realizing how peaceful everything feels. For years, I thought I'd only heal when he apologized. But now, I don't even need it." "That's because peace isn't given," Gareth replied. "It's chosen." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for saving me, but for showing me I didn't need saving." He smiled, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "You saved yourself, Alara. I just had the privilege of watching you do it." Outside, the first rays of sunlight touched the ocean beyond the city, turning it to liquid gold. Alara stood, wrapping her robe around her shoulders, and stepped onto the balcony. The breeze was warm, the world alive beneath her. For the first time, her heart didn't ache. It beat in peace. She whispered into the wind, not out of longing, but release. "I'm free." Inside, Gareth watched her, proud, admiring, and deeply in love. And as the morning light bathed them both, it felt like the world itself was acknowledging her quiet victory. The knock at the door came just as the afternoon light began to fade. Alara looked up from her easel, brush poised midair. She wasn't expecting anyone. Gareth was still at a meeting downtown. Her assistant poked her head in softly. "Mrs. Sterling, there's a man here to see you. He says it's important." Alara frowned slightly. "Did he give his name?" The assistant hesitated. "Yes, Damon Cross." For a moment, Alara's hand stilled. That name, one that once burned her, now stirred nothing more than a calm curiosity. "Send him in," she said quietly. A minute later, Damon stepped into her art studio. He looked older, thinner, his confidence replaced with exhaustion. Gone was the sharp suit and polished arrogance. In its place stood a man stripped bare by regret. "Alara," he began, his voice unsteady. "I know I have no right to be here." She turned, resting her brush down gently. "Then why are you?" He exhaled, glancing around at her paintings, vivid, full of color and life. "Because I needed to see you. To say, I'm sorry." Alara said nothing, her gaze calm and unreadable. "I was cruel," Damon continued, his voice breaking. "Selfish. I thought love was control. I destroyed something beautiful, and I've lived with that every day since." She finally spoke, her tone soft but firm. "You didn't destroy me, Damon. You only taught me what to never accept again." He flinched at her words, but nodded slowly. "You're right. You've built a life far greater than anything I could have given you. I needed you to know that I see it now. That I see you." Alara smiled faintly, not bitter, just at peace. "Then you've learned something worth keeping." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Do you forgive me?" She met his gaze, her expression kind. "I forgave you a long time ago, Damon. Not for you, for me." He looked down, trembling slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. As he turned to leave, Gareth entered the doorway. The two men locked eyes briefly. No rivalry, only understanding. Damon nodded once, humbled, and left quietly. Alara watched him go, then turned to Gareth with a serene smile. "It's finally over," she said. And for the first time, she truly meant it. The evening sky over the city shimmered in gold and lavender hues as Gareth and Alara stood on the balcony of their coastal villa. The sea stretched endlessly before them, calm and blue, like the peace that had finally settled in both their hearts. Alara leaned against the railing, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "It's strange," she said softly, "how something that once hurt so much now feels like it never even belonged to me." Gareth turned toward her, his expression tender. "That's what healing does. It doesn't erase the past, it just removes its power over you." She nodded, her gaze lost in the horizon. I used to think closure meant getting answers or apologies, but now I realize it's simply knowing when to stop looking back. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers, and start living forward. They stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of the ocean, the fading light wrapping around them like warmth after a long storm. Inside, the house glowed softly, filled with art, laughter, and moments that once seemed impossible. It wasn't wealth that made their lives beautiful. It was peace. Gareth turned slightly, his voice thoughtful, almost like a quiet narration to the night. Pride is loud, it shouts to be seen. But humility, it whispers and still changes everything. I've learned that strength isn't found in power, but in gentleness, in the courage to forgive, to grow, to love again. He glanced at Alara, who smiled up at him, serene, radiant, free. She taught me, he continued softly, that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in fighting back, but in walking away with grace. Because peace is the loudest answer of all. The last trace of sunlight faded into the horizon. Alara rested her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes as the waves whispered below. Their story wasn't one of revenge, it was of redemption. Proof that even the deepest pain could birth something beautiful when met with strength and love. And as the screen fades to black, Gareth's voice echoes one last time. Forgive, heal, rise. Because the past only defines you if you let it. Before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories that touch the heart and remind you that grace always wins.